Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Juan Luis Gargurevich y les doy la bienvenida a esta tercera jornada de la séptima semana de la caligrafía en el Perú. El lunes pasado tuvimos una gran sesión con Ricardo Ali, muy divertida. El día de ayer, en la tarde, estuvo Cara con nosotros con una semblanza de nuestro maestro Claude, que fue muy emocionante para nosotros. Y hoy día me toca a mí presentarles a Randall Hasson. Randall es un reconocido calígrafo, pintor, docente, con más de 3 décadas dedicadas al estudio y la enseñanza de la escritura como arte. Su trabajo combina investigación histórica, práctica contemporánea y exploración expresiva del trazo. Es además, o fue coeditor de la 24ª publicación de Speedball Textbook, que fue la edición del centenario, una edición muy linda. Él ha participado en innumerables congresos internacionales de caligrafía, perdón, alrededor del mundo, con temas muy variados que van desde la historia, de la historia de la escritura hasta la industria de las postales de saludo, el arte urbano, el arte sacro, el arte religioso. Desde su estudio en San Diego, en California, desarrolla proyectos que integran la pintura con la tipografía, la escritura a mano, con una mirada diferente que conecta la tradición y la modernidad. En esta sesión, Randall va a compartir con nosotros un video muy didáctico, en donde nos contará primero la evolución de las letras versales y la diferencia con las letras capitales. En este mismo video, además, veremos la construcción paso a paso de su versión de las letras versales. Así que, si pueden, tengan una pluma a la mano, que va a ser muy divertido. Adelante, Randall. We listen to
Well,
you.
I didn't understand everything that Juan Luis just said, but I think he said that I color with crayons a lot, right?
Not really, no.
Which is true. I do. I color with crayons a lot. So, um, what we're going to be seeing today is I actually produced a video because um, I do retreats over a 5 day period, and one year we did Versals. That was the theme was Versals, and so this video will have a lot of history and a little bit of demonstration in it. And so I thought that would be better, and then we could answer questions later. So it's about 40 or 45 minutes. There are subtitles embedded in the video. Some of them are a little bit incorrect. They'll say instead of versals, they'll say reversals. Sometimes I noticed, but in general, I hope you enjoy that. And let me go ahead and share my screen, and and then let's go from there.
Over the years, I've used the letters we call versals on a regular basis in my paintings. The form that I've used is a form that I learned as a young calligrapher. They are easily read, they can have a more formal or casual appearance, and once you know how they're constructed, they have endless possibilities for personalization. Historical models can be an easily readable form based on Roman letters, a more rounded form based on uncial, or a drawn or sketched letter that we call Lombardic. Contemporary forms can take on all kinds of shapes and treatments. Versals can be made with a broad-edged pen in multiple strokes. They can be outlined with a smaller pen and then filled in with ink or paint, or they can be sketched and either rendered or filled in with ink or paint later. Versals are extremely versatile. In this session, we'll explore what versals are, where they came from, how they got their name, and we'll explore some exciting possibilities in using this concept for our own purposes. First, let's take a look at the origins of versals. And to do that, we have to go back and look at early manuscripts. The manuscripts we think of as illuminated evolved over time. While they initially were used by missionaries to spread the gospel, their end use became more varied. Jewel-encrusted and gold-filled books were valued by kings and even used as treasure to reward their loyal subjects. Monks needed texts to study, and the great cathedrals built scriptoriums in order to copy important texts. As universities sprang up in Europe, particularly Paris, professional scribes created manuscripts with subjects ranging from the sciences to astronomy, poetry, history, and literature. As their usage evolved, so too were the letter forms refined. So you can start to see what we're going to call versals, those large illuminated letters or painted letters. And here's a painting that I did. And this lettering actually is a Roman letter form, but it's done in multiple strokes. It's done in what calligraphers would call a versal letter. On this painting, it has a whole bunch of versals on it. When you look at in detail, you'll see that there are these same sort of Roman letter forms. They're bouncing a little bit, but they're multiple strokes. And what I mean by multiple strokes is that the stem stroke is not just made with one stroke of a broad edge pen. And so here is the actual construction method of versals. And when I first learned these, so on the left where it says silent in the big words, that's a filled in or constructed versal. But on the right in the sort of sienna color is how you construct those versals, except in this case, I'm using them a little bit more loosely because I wanted to use this style of lettering intentionally. And so that actually comes through quite a bit in some of my paintings, and it stems from when I learned them and how I learned them. And in fact, the italic in the white, where it says Spirit of the Living God, that also is that same concept of broken apart letters and not filling them in, because I liked it so much with the versals that I wanted to be able to use that when I felt it was appropriate on a painting. And so there's some close-ups of how these versals, that blue in the center there where it says faith is the daring of the soul to go farther than it can see. I can't remember who that was written by because I put his name behind a rock. Sorry. But that would be another example. And then these are what I would consider my style of versals. And we'll be talking about a more formal style and then what I would consider my style. And this has to do a little bit more with the physiology of how my hand works, and how these are constructed is a little bit more of that. Now, there's a difference between versals, which are the red letters on the right, and Romans, which are the kingdom of God right there down at the bottom. That's just that. Those letters that are Romans are single stroke letters. I'm making one stroke with a broad edge pen for each shape or each stem stroke or each shape. But the versals are usually double stroke. They sometimes can be a lot more than that, and they sometimes can be drawn. But just to give you a bit of an idea, and sometimes it's actually hard to tell if somebody's actually using a versal form or it's a Roman form, because some of the people who use these are extremely delicate with their treatment of versals. Rose Folsom wrote a book that was the Calligrapher's Dictionary. And what this description is talking about is boldly decorative initial letters at the beginning of verses as paragraphs, but they're also constructed. And you see that last line. This term is little used among paleographers because it's too general. And it is general. When calligraphers talk about versals, they're talking about a whole really wide range of what's possible in lettering. These are constructed letters. And so when we're talking about versals, people can really start working with these in a whole bunch of different ways. They can be extremely ornate. They can be outlined letters filled in, the inhabited letters. They can also be decorated letters. This is Edward Johnston. Edward Johnston wrote a seminal book for the calligraphers in 1907 called Writing, Illuminating, and Lettering. And he was really sort of the one that revived calligraphy into what we would think of as the modern age. And here's some pages from his books. And you can see in his sort of timeline there on the left about Roman capitals and then uncials and half uncials. And then he used the term versal letters. Versal letters caught on with the calligraphers. It's a terminology thing that the calligraphers used. And then also Lombardic caps and Gothic and so on and so forth. But the versal, this is where the word versal came from for us. The beginning of verses, versal letters. And so these pages of what we call versals are used to really highlight everything. And you can see that these different colors in the verses themselves, they had different colors. They would alternate those colors. And one of the reasons that they'd alternate those colors is because these were large manuscripts. They were on lecterns, and you would have a priest reading. And so the different colors actually function to help them keep their place if they were looking up and then looking back down again. And this is his construction of the versals. So you can see that he's using a small pen. He's reconstructing these. He's saying, okay, here's basically the strokes, and here's how you construct these letters or draw these letters. And you can take a look at the bottom right of the page on the left where there's how you construct an eye. And he's giving you two different ways. Well, you can start with your serifs, and then you can draw the letter in there, or on the right, you can draw the letter first and then add the serifs. And so because these are constructed letters, there's a lot of options. Stan Knight is a historian. He's, in fact, the individual that I learned versals from. Stan is very precise when he's writing his versals. And these are this Roman form. I would consider this more of the English school. Stan is from England. The English school of versals. They're very graceful. They're not heavy. They have a nice lightness to them. And in his particular case, he has very delicate fins to go along with his built up thicker parts of each letter. This is the book that he wrote, and this book is, I know you can still find it, at least used copies and probably new copies. And this is a page out of that book talking about capitals, and this is from the Trinity Gospels. And so when we're talking about using what we call a versal letter, these can be used to write out important words. It's not just necessarily at the beginning of the verse. So this is approximately the 11th century. And here's an example of those versals that are used to work with words, and some rounded capitals as well, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Now, by the way, English, I'm using the word English versals because that just sort of helps me identify them. That's not necessarily a thing. The Speedball textbook, this is the 25th edition of the Speedball textbook. This is Sheila's examples of how to put together versals. Now, we are used to pen widths as a height and weight, but in Sheila's examples, if you take a look at that I and if you take a look at that O, she looks at the width of the waist of the letter. So when you start out a little wider and you come in a little bit more in the middle and then come back a little bit wider, we call that wasting. Well, she says it's 1/8 to 1/10. The height of the letter is how the waist should be. And so she's also talking about very simplified versals on the bottom left, and then the difference between the sort of uncial-esque versal or the rounded versal with serifs, and then the Lombardic versal on the right. And so these are each different types of more traditional versals, but these two basic types are what you see in most of the manuscripts from this time, especially the Lombardic versals. The Lombardic versals were very important in the manuscript production and most of what you'll see in those manuscripts. And this is what I learned from. This is Stan Knight, and Stan is constructing his versals in a different manner. And what you can see from that top is that he's beginning with a broad edge pen. He's got one pen width gap at the top between his strokes, but then those strokes just touch in the middle. And then a one pen width gap at the bottom in order to create that waistline. So these versals are how I learned, and that's how I learned to construct my versals. And I'll tell you, these are controlled. These are very controlled. And I'm used to writing a little bit more free because my nature is not to go quite as slow. as Stan is in order to construct those versals. And so you see from this particular exemplar is where those particular letters come. You can see that the definite relationship between what I'm doing here, albeit a little freer, and what he was doing there. So let's begin with the Roman versals. We'll begin with a simplified form that's a multiple stroke model, and we'll be using a broad pen. The E. Again, I'm pulling with a very slight curve. Proportionately, you can turn your pen and then cross this and then finish it off. Working with the B. And so in working with that, when I come back and add my bowl, I'm going to start with this interior stroke. And that bowl is going to come a little bit above halfway. And then the second bowl is going to go the balance, which will make the second bowl larger. I'm going to come add my curves, and I'm not going to have quite as much space. A little bit of white showing on the bowls. And so we'll work with the A. Come on. This is a pretty straight stroke, but it has a very, very slight curve in towards the bottom. And then I'm going to remember to touch and release on the A. On the diagonals, it seems a little bit better to make these a little less weighty than the stem strokes. Now, I wanted to do the A and V because they're mirror images. Let me go ahead and work with the K, which also, of course, has a couple of diagonals. It has the upper diagonal and the leg. So again, I'm going to flatten my pen, come down a little bit to halfway or below. In this case, it's halfway, just a little bit below, but halfway. And then the same thing with the R. I kind of kick it this way, and then gap here, touching, gap there, and exit. Hopefully more smooth than that. We'll work now with the W, which has a very interesting, it's an interesting letter because of the ductus. So we'll start with our diagonal, end on that point by turning my pen and ending on the edge, gap at the top, touching in the middle, gap at the bottom, and then stopping. But then I'm going to start here. I'm going to start below the cap line because I'm going to have my diagonals coming this way, and I, again, still want to make a point. So I'll come back and meet this. There's my point. Clean that up a little bit. And then the next stroke, making sure it's parallel with this stroke and then ending on that same point, and then I'll be all the way up here. Gap at the middle, gap at the bottom, and then stopping just a little before, and then flatten the pen angle. Come back and meet. And then you can point that. And so that's my way. Now, I almost always am thickening these up. You'll see that when we get to the actual alphabet, but for the construction, I'm just going to leave it that way. Now remember, in the interior of the O, or the rounded letters, is more of an oval, and the exterior becomes more rounded. And so we want to take a conscious look at making a little bit more of an oval. And I've got a pretty flat pen angle here as I begin because we want the thin on the top. So I'm coming around this way. And coming around this way, and you can see There's just a slight difference. This is a nice, actually pretty steady curve. This one's a little bit flatter. Then when I come back for the O, if I can get the ink to flow, I'm going to add the outside curve, and I'm going to be careful to make it a smaller curve. Oh, you can see the difference in the gaps between these two, and so I can come back in here and actually add a little bit of weight on the outside to sort of even that out. A little more oval on the inside, a little more rounded on the outside, which is a natural appearance. Now, I had a pretty flattened pen angle on that, but if I'm using a more natural pen angle, and let's do this for a Q, if I have a more natural pen angle of maybe 20% or so, when I have that natural pen angle, it's a little bit more weighty down here and here. The thicks are on that same pen angle. So if I want to even those out and I have a more of a pen angle, then I'm going to add a little bit more, I'm going to have a little bit more of a gap here, a little bit more weight up here, and less down here on this side. You can see that. So that's above halfway. This one's going to be sort of the opposite. I'm going to go out in order to add the weight, but I should have a little bit more gap starting at halfway and coming all the way down here. See the difference in those gaps? So this one, the gaps are, this one's high, but these gaps are decently even. These gaps are a little bit offset. So if you're using a more natural pen angle, which I tend to do, then just be aware of the thicks and how to compensate for that. And then with the Q, then I can come back in, and as with the leg of the P and the R, I'm going to end it a little bit like that. I'm kind of rotating my pen, and then a little gap and a little gap, and then ending it like that. And then I can fill those in later. But I'm just going to, we'll fill it in and we'll take a look and see how it works. I'm going to go ahead and fill this alphabet in on a slight diagonal. My pen is on a slight diagonal, and so I'll fill it in on a slight diagonal too. Now with this form, I'm also going to thicken the end even on the thin stroke. I'm going to make a little bit thicker there, and then I'll pull that horizontal across. And then I'll also thicken this out just a little bit, flare it out at the end. Some of you are old enough to remember bell bottoms. Meeting the point, connecting those. So we've taken a look at the basic structure and the simplified form of the Roman-based versals. Now let's take a look at those same versals and that same structure with some variation in adding serifs. There's a couple ways to do these serifs. You can make a flat serif, you can make an angled serif. I tend to sort of work with what's happening in the letter instead of trying to make everything perfectly flat or perfectly lateral. I just kind of like to work with what the letter's doing. And so I'm going to do a little bit of those, a little bit more casual rather than formal. And so I'm going to add a serif here. And you'll see that this crosses over. And I'm going to add a serif here. So it's not quite going with the baseline, and yet it gives it a little bit more formal. I'm going to thicken here. Come back and thicken down here as we have been doing, and I'll add a serif there. A little bit of a kick out on the M as I do. Again, certainly not necessary for you to do. It's just my style of M seems to work better for what I like. A little bit of an overlap here. I might be able to fix that. And again, not perfectly parallel with the baseline. Let's just go ahead and do this. I wanted to do that and fill it in at the end so you could see the strokes here. Now that we've looked at the Roman versal form in both simplified and serifed iterations, let's take a look at what I would consider my versal form. So the method that I'd like to show you works a little bit more with my natural physiology and the way my hand works. I've also discovered that sometimes I'm not making a waist right in the middle. Rather, I might make a straight stroke on one side and then a slightly curved stroke on the other side. Sometimes my stem strokes are just slightly curved. And most times I'm looking at the letters that come before and the letters that's going to come after and working with the context in order to put my letters into space. Accordingly, sometimes I can shorten, lengthen, or extend strokes depending on what's coming before or after. All of these adjustments are important in working with the rhythm of versal lettering. Now, the Lombardic forms can be drawn or sketched. There are numerous models for the Lombardic form, but these forms in general are rounded and can be worked into whatever you want to do. Lombardic is the cap form that you see in many of these examples, even the ones where we were talking about the English capitals, what Stan Knight calls the English capitals, or the Roman capitals, or constructed Roman capitals. In the body of the text, the rounded capitals, the multicolored, alternating colored rounded capitals are the Lombardic form. They're also called Gothic because these forms, both the Roman form that we've already talked about and this form, were in the Gothic period. So they're called Gothic by some lettering artists and some scholars. And there's many, many examples of these in books from the period in many, many different ways. But in general, they're on a rounded form. For example, if I go back and you look at the two M's that are on here in the end, those are rounded forms. But take a look at that M. That's a square form. So it depends on who you're talking to, and you have a whole bunch of options on how to do these. Some of these are based a little bit more on what you would look at as uncial forms. So as an artist, I'm looking at these many times and I'm looking at the shape characteristics of an alphabet rather than the construction. These are all based on ovals, right? I mean, that's the obvious shape characteristic for these that we looked at a little bit earlier. And here's a bunch of different ways to deal with Lombardic forms, but the top in black are the general forms. They're a little bit archaic. They're not something I'd necessarily want to use, especially the C and the D. I just don't think they're real readable. Even the E looks a little bit more like a Greek letter to me. So for modern use, I may or may not want to use these as samples, but nevertheless, they have their basis in historic. And look at that M. It's closed on the bottom of the left and it's open on the bottom of the right. This is out of some French lettering manual that I could never find the attribution for. Sorry about that, but these are gorgeous letters. And again, look at that M based literally on a circle. This is Calligraphy by Claude Mediavilla. And I've got this next to a historic manuscript page so that you can see those E's, those versal capital E's. And then he's got his versal capitals, and here's a close-up of those versal capitals. This is the way that he's constructing those. And this guy is one of the finest calligraphers in the land who's created one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen. Here's the letters he was using for that particular space. There's a whole bunch of them done in gold. And there's a whole bunch more done in gold. So historically, there's models to work with, but then we have choices as to what we want to do with them. This is from, I believe, Luc Devroy, which is a font site where they have a bunch of history on the site as well. And here's that book that I like so much, the calligraphy source book with the construction of these. Notice the M doesn't have that crossbar at the bottom. The E doesn't have that crossbar on the side. It has serifs that almost touch, but it doesn't have that solid crossbar, which relates to me a lot better, or relates for me a lot better. But I don't like, by the way, that W. I don't like that literal double U that are doing. I prefer a W that's a more pointed W. This is Margaret Shepard, who said, hey, these are based on circles. And that's true. And I like the analysis of this. And yet at the same time, I hate that M. It's so compressed to me. And the A is way too wide to me. And yet, if I look at historical examples, I see those letters. She's not just making this up out of her head. And she's doing this to make a point. And then here's her construction principles of these versals. And you can see that almost triangular construction on the top line to the very right of the O, which some people might do. I don't happen to like that angular structure as much. I'd prefer a rounded structure, but here's another way, another construction example. And so the Speedball textbook that Angie and I did, the 24th edition back in 2015, we had Lily Ronker in there. Lily Ronker, a longtime calligrapher. These are her examples. Now, I like her W a lot better because she's basically related it to the M. But she's also done down at the bottom the more square alternatives. So if you want to go with a square M and a square N, that's fine. Mark Van Stone out of the current book, talking about, he's specifically talking about knotted letters, but these are based on an uncial or an uncial-esque form of Lombardic versal letters. So out of that book, if you want to do more Celtic knot work and you like that rounded form, then here's a way to do that as well. This is a fantastic book. And if you really want to get into specifically illuminated letters, then Margaret Morgan's book is for you. And it's an excellent book because she's put so much thought into each section. So here's some of these letters, the sketch letter on the upper left, where the Ottonian letters came from, and how to construct those letters, complete, by the way, with gold leaf. This is a very detailed book with a little bit of history on each letter form and then step-by-step instructions on completing that finished letter form that you see on the left. David Harris, this is probably still available if you're looking online. And so you can take a look at each of these alphabets, and here's his Lombardic capitals and how he treats those. But I love the way that he shows not only the ductus, which is the order of strokes, I just love the way that these were laid out in the construction. Now, I don't necessarily like the M, for example, and yet I really like the M all at the same time. It's just not something probably that I would do. I really don't like the X and the Y. I would never do those. And then I started working with constructed letters. So on the top, here are some Lombardic style letters that I'm just working with. And by the way, when I am working with these, I like sort of figuring out what the source did shape-wise and how they constructed these letters. But then I like to close the book and put it away, put the model away and see what I'm going to come up with, which I think is it's a good way to do it as long as you maintain some semblance of balance and some semblance of consistency. And so here's some drawn out letters in different styles. The one on the third line is open. The one on the last line is more uncial-esque. And that sort of led to working with these letters and just working with a pencil. There's a whole bunch of erasing going on. Man, I erase a lot. I was like, oh, that was a terrible curve. You can see how much I built up the B. And as an example, take a look at the N on the end of the second line, how high that thing comes up. Well, then I wanted to color them in. And so I colored them in with colored pencil. I was just working with these, and you can see that I've adjusted the N and erased that top where it came up a lot and then made the adjustments with colored pencils. But this is a style of letters that I just decided to come up with. I closed the book and I said, well, what do I want? Square letters? Do I want round letters? Do I care? And I think I had at a certain point, I think I had that David Harris model up just because every once in a while I wanted to look at a letter here and there. But in general, these are something that's influenced by what I've been looking at, but also something that I wanted to work with. For example, if you look at the M, you'll notice that there's serifs on the M. There's not one whole crossbar on that M. I happen to like the M that is more open. I also happen to like the W that is more pointed. I don't know why, but I just do. And there's a couple of different ways to make the A. That first A that I made is a more square style of an A. And then at the very bottom, the last couple of letters, I made a more uncial style or Lombardic style A as an option. Same thing with the R. The R at the bottom is a little bit different than the blue R third from the end on the third line. The leg of the blue R is more of a Lombardic style, and I like the last one maybe a little bit better. So it's just, these are things that I was experimenting with, and I just, where I was thinking, they're just sketches, they're rough. They're, colored pencil. And so I think that's a pretty legit way to work. Anyway, I just wanted to go over that with you. And then when we get to the modern forms of Versals, all bets are off. We can really, really push the thicks versus the thins and make a really large contrast. We can dance the letters back and forth and make more of a freeform appearance with our lines. We can inhabit the letters either with drawing figures or images or just plain designs and decorations. And we can sort of construct our own letters, break them apart and put them back together depending on our whims. This is a lady named Anne Heckel. I've never had the pleasure of meeting Anne. And she's a very famous calligrapher, especially in the UK. She was very instrumental in starting the class organization, which is the Calligraphy and Lettering Arts Society. And she taught at Roehampton. And so when I've been referring to English versals or the English style of versals, this is the kind of thing that I think of. This is Anne Heckel's work, and she does quite a bit of the Roman form of versals and built up letters. And so she's been one of those people that everybody looks to in sort of our modern age of the revival of calligraphy, along with people like obviously Donald Jackson and Sheila Waters and many other people. So here are her versals, the way that she works with these Roman letters and thickens everything up. She really is one of those people who kind of sets the standard for the British or European styles of letters. All of the calligraphers know Sheila Waters. She's sort of the grand dame of calligraphy. She has passed away earlier this year, but really has been one of the most important figures in calligraphy for us in the time that we've all been coming up and learning. And her works are really quite amazing. This is a play by Dylan Thomas that it was just this magnificent book. It's a very sort of a famous work. And these are her letters, these built up or drawn letters. These are not single stroke letters done with a pen, but rather they're built up and drawn letters in what we would call the Versal style. And look at all of the work she did behind the letters in all of these. She was a graphic designer and the computers weren't in use. And so Sheila has trained many, many people. They've gone to her house for years. She's traveled and taught for years, and you can see why. And so these are the types of letters that you can sort of gravitate towards if you want. This is the whole purpose of this. If you're a calligrapher, if you're interested in calligraphy, The Foundations of Calligraphy is one of the books that you really have to have in your library. And this is a book that she's written, and some of the pieces that we have shown come out of this book. We've talked a little bit about Stan Knight, his version of Versals. And again, he comes from that English tradition. In these cases, he's got serifs on it. And you can see on the A in grape that he's really done one of the more simple versions of A, but then he's crossed it with a serif. But he hasn't done the serif and closed the base of the A. He's let the serif just kind of kiss one of the sides of the A. Same thing in the I in grain, in the stem stroke on the R. There's little subtleties that these artists will put in their letter forms in order to give them their own unique quality and their own unique way of doing things. Svetlana Molodchenko graciously gave me permission to show some of her work, and her work's pretty incredible, folks. She's a professional. She's from Armenia. She's commissioned to work all over the world, and she does super fine, really, really gorgeous illuminations. Here's a pretty detailed sketch, and you can see on the bottom towards us and on the top away from us, those are her pencil sketches before she's inked them. This is in the process of her inking these sketches in before she's done anything else. This type of work is really important in our genre. So her work is modern from a traditional perspective. One of the finest calligraphers and illuminators in the world, Svetlana Molodchenko. This is a lady from Canada named Renee Alexander, and I actually wrote to her and said, are these Versals? Are you building these up? Because I think you are, but I'm not sure. And she said, yes, I get that question a lot. And yes, these are built up letters. And she just has a beautiful hand, again, in what I would hearken back to that Anne Heckel English sort of style in this work. She's obviously got great control over these letters. These are really consistent and really beautiful letters, but she's also a really good artist as well. And this is on decently rough paper. I like this one because it's pencil, ink, and then she did some small, really nicely done Romans on the bottom here. Tim Sokel, this is a name of a band called Prelude. And so he designed this and just made it a really beautiful sort of masthead for them. These are more insular / uncial kind of a style of letters, but just the way he filled these letters in, very simple shapes, very simple designs. Same guy using a ruling pen, doing a Versal to make those marks. And then there's my friend Barbara Close. Barbara Close has been doing Versals for years. I love Barbara. She's one of the greatest. And if you asked Barbara where she would park, she would not be going to the right. These are her Versals. And so she's really taken the balance of thicks and thins to the extreme. And she just is so easy with her calligraphy. So this is the kind of work she does. She's super playful. She's uninhibited. She's very free. Nationally and internationally known instructor. Here's her exemplar. Try and follow that, will you? You color those in and you have a kaleidoscope effect. So this is Yoka Bowden's. She really draws all of her letters, but I mean, look at the way that she puts this stuff together. If you want to know how to work out space and have just an amazing design, you study this lady. And I love that she's just uninhibited about saying, you know what? The space of the A it's going to make the spacing look really bad. So I think I'll just turn it upside down so everything fits better spacing wise. And you can see she's also not afraid to use different kinds of letters within the same layout. The D's, a lowercase d right next to an uppercase or capital D, 3 kinds of G's in Higgledy-Piggledy. 2 of them are curled. One of them is more traditional, and then there's one where it curls back in, but it ends traditional. I mean, she's just working with the interaction of these letters, and she's done this for so long that she just has a knack for it. So these are some other possibilities. So if you work clean and you love a really clean design, she just is a fantastic one to study. And obviously all of it is just really, really, really gorgeous. Nancy was in one of my classes. I have no idea why, a long time ago. And so this is her version of drawn letters, where we really all kind of the coming out of the closet, so to speak, for Nancy was at this Colorado conference when she had these journals, that journal on the right. And she had been working in this journals, and she sat down at a table at one of the sharing sessions, and everybody was just blown away. And so this is her work, and these are her drawn and built up letters, and the way that she puts everything together in a totally different graphic effect. I get the same sense that the Yoka Bowden's is very meditative in her work like this. Even on the bottom there, the name Dorcas in the sort of Rennie McIntosh style is still their drawn letters. So here's some ideas for you if you want to work with what we're calling Versals, but really are drawn or built up letters. This I thought was super interesting because I went to lunch the other day at a local restaurant called Pizza Nova with my wife, and what caught my eye was this. And this is the backside of those letters. And it reminded me a little bit of this John Stevens work. And he's just working around with these double stroked or double stroke stems. I think he might have said something about Versals in whatever he posted this on. This was done, I don't even remember when, in a workshop. This is all done in colored pencil and pretty typical of what I like to do with a Versal as far as the way that the serifs look. I really like that sort of serif that's has a little bit of a curve to it. And then here is an alphabet, and these are those sort of more casual Versals, a little bit more upright on the top, just a little bit of more of a degree of slant on the bottom. But that's what I was showing you, those sort of more natural hand motions that made that up. And here's some close-ups of those. As you can see, the same sort of construction, and what we were talking about that on the bottom of the E, that more natural stroke coming out of the bottom of the E, the exit stroke, for me is a nicer way to do things, less arduous and more rhythmic for me. And it's born of how I would do Romans, actually, but just double stroking. So in any case, I sort of wanted to just go over that in order to kind of give you some extra ideas about, okay, here's some lettering, but here's how other people handle this lettering. I'm not necessarily a really huge believer in only showing my lettering because there's so many people who do these things so much better.
you enjoyed that. It was, I really like kind of giving more of a survey of how this lettering, how all these different people do this lettering, and so I hope that was informative. And I guess we're opening up for questions.
Thank you, Randall. There is a tons of information in your video. We have we must see again. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe some comments. I don't know. Please go ahead.
Randy, the presentation was so good, and I think that this is something that you can watch again and again, and each time pick up something new.
That's what I just said. I've been through this 3 times, and I keep learning something new every single time. It's awesome.
Yeah, there was is it Erendira?
Yeah.
Had a question about rotating the paper. So I just maybe I can make a comment about that. Let's see if I can. So many times if I'm sitting at the paper and this is straight, now I'm straight to the paper. When I'm using a pen, if I'm straight to the paper, I'm actually pulling into my body. Does that make sense? I'm pulling into my body. So I actually have just a little bit of a slant, and the reason is because when my arm pulls a stroke, it's actually easy for me to pull straight because I'm pulling past. I'm not pulling into my body. I'm pulling past, and it's easier for me. So I don't know, Erendira, if that answers your question, but I usually have a little bit of a slant, and I know that if you are trained with somebody like Sheila Waters, who is an extremely traditional calligrapher, she has the paper straight. I don't know how Claude Dietrich did that, but I found that it's more natural for my hand to have just a little bit of a slant on the paper, if that answers your question.
You don't move just your finger, but or your arm. But,
no. I've done quite a bit of study of the early lettering artists, the show card artists of the early 1900s that made their hand lettered signs. And one of the best was a man named William Gordon. And he talked a lot about whole arm movement. And if you work with pointed pen, and if you work with many of the teachers in Iampath, they'll also talk about whole arm movement, not just your fingers, but using your whole arm. And William Gordon was a teacher of penmanship before he became a show card artist. So that if you're doing little letters, yes, I guess you're going to use your fingers more. But I usually like to work at about when I'm thinking about how to construct letters, I usually like to work a little bit larger, maybe an inch, and that gives me more room to play with the pen and the structure.
About Versals, how about make a serif with pointed pen?
I don't, but I'll usually use a smaller pen. By the way, this was a couple of you were asking what size nib that I was using. I never know. I can't read that small. But I usually just line everything out with pen nib widths. So I don't know what I think I can read. I think this is a C4, but many of them I can't read. So I don't usually remember. On my exemplars, I do say what pen and how many nib widths though. So
okay. Anybody?
I just want to say that was so inspiring to see all of that work put together and to watch the speed that you could do those versals. And you were talking at the same time you were doing the Versals in that little demo, right? Like that's just absolutely amazing. But it was very inspiring, and I only bought one book, so that's pretty good.
You really only one?
I only bought one. I had everything else. Yeah.
Wait, which one?
The source book, the calligraphy source book by Miriam. Yeah, that's good. Well done.
Yeah, I think it's important. I like to see teachers writing at their normal pace, and I'm more of a little bit more of a rhythm writer. So I was talking about Stan Knight earlier, and I said this. I watched him do his Versals, and it was so slow and so arduous. I almost felt like there'd be a little bead of sweat dripping off his nose onto the paper. It was so, and I can't. It's really difficult for me to go that slow. So in my examples in that video, you probably will have noticed the early construction. It's pretty shaky. I'm not used to doing everything perfectly straight, and I don't. But once I got into my rhythm and what my hand does, it's a little smoother, and I'm a little bit quicker, I think, than some. So yeah, probably too fast.
No, that was wonderful. It was really good to see that. Thank you.
That little imperfection make the letters like dancing, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Perfection is the enemy of a lot of things, including art, maybe.
I agree. Yeah.
Unless you're Svetlana Molodchenko, then perfection is fine.
Yes. ¿Alguna pregunta más de los amigos?
Hay una pregunta en el chat. If you would Roman capitals with a pointed nib or whichever, would you put those ones on a versal group as well?
If you were Roman capitals with pointed nibs.
Yeah.
So not necessarily. And so the book, my favorite book ever in history is the Claude Mediavilla book. And he uses a pointed nib for Romans, and he uses that pointed nib with pen pressure. So if you're writing Spencerian or copperplate, you're used to putting pressure on the downstroke. A calligrapher who is writing Romans will reverse that. They'll put more pressure and then less pressure and then more pressure as you go down on the stem stroke. And Claude Mediavilla used a pen nib. So this is a speedball nib. And the speedball nib, if you press it, it has, I don't know, it has it has two splits, right? So if you let me change. So if I press that, see how it splits, and there's three tines, there's two splits. Okay, this speedball pen was made from a pointed pen. They got the idea from a pointed pen made by Hunt that had two splits. And Claude Mediavilla has those pens, or had those pens when he was making those Romans, because they're ultra flexible. They were used for making music. They were used for writing music notes. They were so flexible that they could split very wide for the ball of the note, and then make the stem with the pointed part. And so they're called music writers. Now they're different than the music staff writers that we think of. They have, four tines and you go across. These were pointed pens. So yes, Edward Johnston made his Versals with a small pen. He drew the Versals and then he filled them in. So yes, you can make them with a pointed pen, but you can also make regular Romans with a pointed pen. So it depends on your use. I hope I didn't confuse the issue too much.
Ah, mm, no sé, ¿alguna pregunta más? Si no,
Thank you for the answer. I had a question. I have a question too. Do you recommend any special kind of pencil colors for starting to learning?
Any special kind of
Oh,
colored pencils?
color pencils.
Yeah, well, I have my favorites. One of the colored pencils that I was using in the video are Heather's favorites. They're called polychromos. I used them because of Heather, because she said they were her favorites. My favorites personally are they're called Bronzeal. They're well, Bronzeal is here. I'll show you.
There's a joke here because you say that you used to use crayon.
So these are Bronzeal pencils. Okay, so Bronzeal, and they're Dutch, and literally, I love colored pencils. These are very buttery. They go down very smooth. I also like Lyra, and so these Bronzeal are wax-based colored pencils, and the Lyra are oil-based colored pencils. And I like both. And so when anybody asks my wife, well, what's your husband at home doing? She says, oh, he's coloring. And I'll be using these. So.
Okay, Randall. Te agradecemos muchísimo haber estado con nosotros. We thank you. A ver si alguien me traduce, por favor. ¿Estás acá, Marina?
Acá estoy, puedo ayudar.
Sí, le agradecemos mucho a
deeply
Randall por haber
appreciate
estado
you being here.
con nosotros hoy día. Ha sido un video realmente muy didáctico.
The video was exceptional and very educative.
Well, there's a lot of pressure. I'm working for Juan Luis, so you know, it has to be good.
Y seguramente muchos de nosotros lo vamos a volver a ver porque realmente
and many of us will see it over and over again because it has a lot of information.
And a practice, of course. Así que, bueno, nos despedimos. Muchas gracias a todos por haber estado este día con nosotros. Por la tarde tenemos al gran Michael Saul.
So this afternoon they will have Michael Saul.
A las 5 horas de Lima, ¿sí? A las 5 horas de Lima, ¿de acuerdo? Así que los esperamos y muchas gracias.
And if I could you send me the chat? That would be great if you could. I'll have to do some translating to see some of the comments, but Okay, very good. Marina, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you as well, Randy. I messed it up with the time. I have it written down for 1 o'clock, so I arrived half an hour later. But I will watch the recording, definitely. It's great. But I was asking, did you include Peter Thornton?
No, I didn't. I should have. Actually, I should have included Peter.
He has some so personal.
Yeah, Peter Thornton. Yeah, he should have been in there. I actually did a whole magazine article on Peter for Washington Calligraphers Guide. I have so many of his
variations are so unique, so crazy sometimes. I think he's so creative. Yeah.
Yeah, I have. Maybe some people don't know Peter. Peter Thornton's work. Is this him? Yeah. But Peter this is a magazine article I did on Peter, and these are some of his Versals.
He has such good taste. He's so elegant in
so
the
he's
way.
He's got wonderful writing, you know, seeing how he does. He's very, very unique in his work. And
you came up with a D nib, really? The rounded nib.
No,
No?
I think he draws.
He draws mainly.
Yeah, he does a lot of drawing. Look at these at the bottom where my hand is.
Randall, what edition is that?
This is Scripsit that was from spring of, does that say 2021?
Okay.
Yeah, Scripsit. I'm not sure how many, they don't order millions of these. Here what I loved putting together. These are some of his sketches and notes.
Yeah, a million notes, a million drawings. Yeah, I do have some originals of him. He would let them go like bread.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it may be better to I mean, he's so good. Maybe it's better to show it this way. It's a little easier to see. But it was really fun to you know, sort of put these things together in such a way. Isn't it just beautiful? I want my letters to be burdened with affection, not perfection, right?
Yeah.
Right? So Peter was really it was really fun. I did a lot of pages for Peter. I think I only put 2 people in this issue when I was doing this, and it was just, you know, just beautiful to put together.
And also, he's so funny. He has a sense of humor like yours, Randall.
Oh no, he's much more clever, much more clever. Yes. So, in any case, anyway, I know we've gone over, and I know everybody has to go because there's a lot of Zoom. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks to you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Randall. It was great to hear you and see the presentation.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Randall. Muchas gracias, amigos de Caligrafía.
Thank you. Gracias.